On their wedding day, they made a murder pact that if either of them ever cheated, that they would have to kill the person they had an affair with. And this disturbing promise ended in multiple people losing their lives. This might possibly be one of the most bizarre cases I've covered in a very long time. You're just not gonna believe half of what I'm telling you. Kelly was a very difficult child growing up. Her parents just couldn't control her, and it got even worse when Kelly became a teenager. Kelly was rebelling, she was using substances and alcohol, and even as a very young teenager, became addicted to the hard substance H. Kelly was really smart though. She went to college and got a degree in psychology and forensic science. And then during college, she started dating an older guy. He was 4 years older than her, named Jason Cochran. Kelly and Jason fell head over heels for each other, but no one approved of the relationship because it was extremely toxic. They were constantly fighting, and sometimes it would even get violent. And a lot of people said that Kelly was actually the aggressor in the relationship, but there was one time that Jason pulled a weapon on Kelly during a fight. So there's clearly issues on both sides. They hadn't actually been together for very long, and the relationship was very toxic, so they could have just broken up, but they didn't. Instead, they got married, and like I said, it was very, very quick. And on their wedding day, Jason and Kelly made a very disturbing promise to each other. They made what they called a blood pact, that if either of them ever cheated on the other one, that the cheater would have to murder the person that they had an affair with. They were married for a couple years, and everything was seemingly okay, but everything went downhill when Jason got a very serious back injury. He could no longer work or really do anything physical. Jason became extremely depressed because he was just home alone all of the time doing nothing. And Kelly was very dismissive of his feelings. She mocked her husband and said that he was annoying her. And since Jason wasn't working anymore, Kelly was working multiple jobs just to make ends meet. And when she wasn't working, she was going out partying, leaving her husband Jason home alone. It was while Kelly was going out all the time, leaving her husband home alone, who could barely even move, Kelly began having an affair. Kelly met and started dating the hardworking, divorced dad of 2 children, Chris Reagan. At one point, Jason found out that his wife was cheating, and this sent Jason into an even deeper depression, but Kelly did not care. What started as just a little fling with Chris actually became quite serious. They really fell for each other, or at least Kelly fell for Chris. Because at one point in the relationship, Chris actually got a job offer in a different state, and he planned on taking this job and moving, so he broke things off with Kelly. Kelly was devastated, and then she was angry that Chris would choose his job over her. So what does Kelly do? She runs back to her husband, Jason. Kelly tells Jason that she wants to make their marriage work. And Kelly tells her husband that the only way that they can fix their marriage is if they go through with the blood pact that they made on their wedding day. That if either of them ever cheated, that the person they had an affair with would have to die. The original blood pact was that the cheater would have to kill the person they had an affair with, but Kelly somehow was able to convince her husband Jason to murder her boyfriend Chris. So on October 14th, 2014, right before Chris was supposed to move, Kelly invited him over for one last goodbye. So Chris goes over to Kelly's house, and the second he's inside, Kelly starts to seduce him, which was a part of the plan, and Kelly and Chris actually begin to sleep with each other when Jason burst in and then shot Chris in the back of the head, killing him instantly. Immediately, Kelly began to clean up the crime scene. She drove Chris's car about 30 miles away and abandoned it there. And then Jason used a power saw to dismember Chris's body. Now, what happens next is even more disturbing than that. So if you're eating right now, you might want to stop. Right after Chris was murdered, Jason and Kelly hosted this big backyard barbecue party and invited all of their neighbors. Now, this was something that they had never done before. There was a lot of meat at this barbecue, and some of the neighbors said it was way too much because Jason and Kelly didn't have a lot of money, and it looked like they would have spent over $200 with how much meat was being served at this barbecue party. And a lot of the neighbors said that it really looked weird and that the meat really tasted weird. And although it's never been 100% proven because there's no more evidence because it was served to people, it is pretty much believed that Kelly and Jason served their neighbors Chris's remains, and their neighbors unknowingly ate Chris Reagan. I know, It's extremely disturbing. Chris Reagan wasn't reported missing for 2 weeks, but once he was, the police immediately started looking at Kelly because it was no secret that they were having an affair. The police questioned both Kelly and her husband Jason, and both of them deny knowing where Chris is, but the police knew that there was something off and they were very suspicious of them, but there was no evidence to confirm their suspicions. So months and months went by. Throughout that time, the investigators were able to find like tiny pieces of evidence here and there. They found traces of blood at Kelly and Jason's property. And also Chris's phone records showed that he was having communications with Kelly the day that he was last seen. But other than that, there wasn't anything for the investigators to go off of. And at this point, Chris is still considered a missing person because they didn't find his body. Kelly and Jason actually end up selling their house and moving states away to kind of escape the investigation. And it really did slow down the investigation. And although there really wasn't anything going on in the investigation at this point, Kelly is so confident that she's going to get away with the murder that even though she moved away, she's still cooperating and speaking quite often with the investigators that are looking for Chris. They told Kelly that her husband Jason was about to crack and confess to everything. This made Kelly so paranoid. She really thought that her husband Jason was a liability, that if she was ever going to get caught, it was because one day he was going to slip up and say something he wasn't supposed to. So Kelly thought that her husband Jason also had to die. So one night in February of 2016, Kelly secretly dosed her husband Jason with a large amount of the hard substance H, which made him black out. And then she suffocated her husband Jason. The next morning, Kelly called 911 and said she woke up and found her husband dead in bed, said that he must have overdosed or died in his sleep. But right away, the investigators on Jason's case knew that he had been murdered. And it looked even worse when they found out that Jason's wife, Kelly, was also the prime suspect in another murder in a different state. One of the investigators lied to Kelly and said that before Jason died, he wrote them a note confessing to Chris's entire murder. So finally, Kelly sort of began to crack. She told the investigators that Chris was dead because remember at this point they hadn't found a body, but she blamed Chris's murder entirely on her now dead husband Jason. At this point, they finally felt like they had enough evidence to arrest Kelly, and her trial began on Valentine's Day of 2017 for the murder of Chris Reagan. She pled not guilty, but she was found guilty and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For her husband's murder, she took a plea deal and she was sentenced to an additional 65 years. And it was after Kelly took this plea deal that she finally confessed to everything in Chris and Jason's murders. There was a very important part of this plea deal that she took in Jason's murder because after she took that plea deal, it stated that she could never be charged with another murder ever again. And this is actually really important because Kelly's brother actually came forward and said that he believes that his sister, Kelly Cochran, is a serial killer with at least 9 other victims in 4 different states. Now, apparently, Kelly Cochran has said that this is true and she has killed other people. She actually said that she buried bodies in Minnesota, Michigan, Tennessee, and Indiana. But as of right now, there is no evidence that she has any other victims. And even if there was, because of her plea deal, she would never ever be held responsible. That's all I have on this truly bizarre and disturbing case today. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for listening to Chris Reagan's story. He really did seem like a really wonderful guy who just got caught up in this really disturbing marriage between 2 really evil people. I'll see you guys all next time on my next video. Have a safe holiday season.